Kia ora, I'm Chelsea Daniels, and this is The Front Page, a daily podcast presented by the New Zealand Herald. For weeks now, headlines have been peppered with Te Pāti Māori's infighting. The crescendo came when the party's National Council opted to expel MPs Mariameno Kapa-Kingi and Tākuta Ferris from Parliament. Both have called the move unconstitutional. They'll sit as independents in the Beehive for now. But what's led to this very public spat? And what's next for the party ahead of election 2026? Today on the front page, University of Auckland Professor Jason Mika is with us to discuss. First off, Jason, let's take a look back. Can you tell me how we got here?
Well, I guess it seems to be that there is certainly some disagreement, some serious disagreement that's occurred within Te Pāti Māori that has to do with people's behaviour, people's points of view or personality differences, and the way in which people have conducted themselves that has not been to the satisfaction of Te Pāti Māori and its rulebook, its constitution. And so, the Te Pāti Māori has gone through a process, a tikanga Māori process of having a kōrero and consulting with constituents and members and communities about, okay, what are the nature of the concerns and how best can we deal with them, and they've reached a conclusion at this point, at least anyway.
Yeah, so both MPs have called their expulsions unconstitutional and are planning to challenge it. Do you reckon they've got any grounds? We will see,
because what I observe is that the real knuckle, the real essence of the problem is not really clear. And in terms of, which part of the Constitution has been not been complied with and adhered to, and what kind of evidence is there available to support that. That's really sort of an internal matter and process which the Party of Māori have sort of followed through on. And so the thing about rules is that they can be challenged. There's always the possibility that we can go back and sort of say, well, we can contest evidence, we can contest rules, and that's the nature of constitution. So we'll certainly see what comes through with how far they want to take it, whether it's not there's an internal process or an external process.
And the fact that the situation kind of does remain a bit unclear, do you reckon that is a failing of leadership, or do you think that it's just that unclear?
It's certainly just, they've followed the process according to what the process says they should do, which is tikanga Māori processes of kōrero, of wānanga, of trying to get to the knuckle of the raruraru, and so they've followed that process, but they've also followed what Te Pāti Māori believes to be the constitutional process that they adhere to as a political party. And so I guess the difficulty is that there's a public sort of sharing of what's going on, which is social media, the media, and within around kitchen tables around the countryside, we're all talking about it. So there's that sort of public side, but there's also that private side of what's going on for these particular members, and also their whānau, and the processes of how these these discussions have occurred. That's the stuff that we won't necessarily see. So there's both going on, and so from that point of view, it's very intriguing, but also sort of challenging and tough for us to sort of watch what's going on there.
Yeah, that level of transparency, I can see that they want to be transparent, but like you said, there's obviously stuff happening behind closed doors. Do you reckon it has helped or hindered them coming out and maybe airing a little bit of the dirty laundry, but not all of it?
Well, it depends on which side of the sort of the fence you're sort of sitting on there. If you're a person there who's been sort of ousted from the party, so to speak, then, has that helped them in terms of, where they're situated at the moment? And in terms of Te Pāti Māori, its prospects, its position, and its status in Parliament, we'll start to see the impact of what's played out over the last few months, over the next few months.
Tell me about the waka jumping legislation, and could it in fact apply here?
Yeah, I guess that's a mechanism in place to allow parties to ensure that there is representation for parties who were voted into Parliament by the voters, and so it's a really tricky one. So the mechanism is available, and it'll be up to Te Pāti Māori to activate that mechanism. But the issue for me is we've got constituents who voted in these members to represent them in Parliament, and now we're saying we're actually, we're taking away that representation from those constituents through this decision that's been made about those members. And so, that's the difficulty of the waka jumping mechanism, is that, is it for the Māori party, Te Pāti Māori, to decide who, those members are no longer going to represent them in Parliament? That's basically what they decided. And the waka jumping mechanism really takes that to the full extent of saying, well, no, we need new representation, and we need the people to be able to make that decision about who represents them in Parliament. So they've separated out the electorate from the party, and that's really the sort of major consideration there.
This decision was not taken lightly. Many hoped the end would be reconciliation. It could not be achieved. We acknowledge the mamae our people have felt, and we thank our National Council for upholding our kawa and the best interests of our movement throughout. This internal matter should never have played out in public. It has been an unnecessary distraction at a dark time for our country as this government continues its relentless attacks on our people.
Is there anything stopping the pair of them just joining up and creating another Māori-led party in Parliament?
That depends on whether or not that waka jumping mechanism is activated. So if it's not, then, I guess then that they would be free to form another political party to galvanise their sort of particular interest and priorities in Parliament.
And what do you reckon the chances of that are happening?
Well, who knows, because if Te Pāti Māori really sort of wants to ensure that Te Pāti Māori representatives coming from those particular constituents that are affected by the ousting, then it's really up to them. So it's in their, it's their call. And in the meantime, we have two new independent Māori MPs in Parliament, and they are, as independents, they're free to sort of work out how they wish to organise themselves in Parliament, either as a political party, a movement, or as independents.
So the waka jumping legislation not only covers waka jumping to another established party, but it could in fact be, if you were to start a new party, for instance, it does apply there as well.
Yeah, I haven't taken a look at the legislation for a while, but that's something for Te Pāti Māori to work through.
Do you reckon the expulsions? I thought, because they had a few options on the table, right? And expelling them, do you reckon it's kind of like a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation? If they were suspended for a couple of weeks, people would be asking, why didn't you expel them? Now they're expelled, people are asking, why didn't you look at the other two options? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm sure they considered all the options, and for Te Pāti Māori, that was the option that they thought was going to be the right one for Te Pāti Māori, but certainly the voters will have a say at some point about whether or not that was the right call.
Well, speaking of voting, we're not too far away from election 2026. Do you reckon this saga, I suppose, has hurt Te Pāti Māori?
Yeah, time will tell. I mean, with ngā piki me ngā heke, the ups and downs of Parliament, it's really up to Te Pāti Māori to solidify and consolidate their position and to ensure that they remain an effective voice in Parliament for te ao Māori, for the nation, in respect of the issues that they care about, and certainly for the independents, the new independent Māori MPs to do the same. And then it really is down to the voters to make their call.
What do you reckon will give them the best shot at galvanising after this huge saga?
I would say really when things get really tough and difficult, there's no substitute for kōrero, for wānanga, for calling a hui to talk things through. And I know that hui have been held with the iwi chairs and with others, with constituents, with whānau, with communities. And I think that hui, is still needed to talk things through until there is some agreement about what is the best way forward and how do we move forward. So kōrero, no substitute for kōrero and wānanga and hui to work out our way forward.
How do you reckon this is reflected on Debbie Ngarewa Paka and Rawiri Waititi?
It's a tough day at the office, for sure.
Yeah.
For leaders of Te Pāti Māori to basically negotiate both the private and the public, interest and the process that they've had to manage. They've had to manage both sides of that process, and so it's clearly been tough for them as leaders, and they're not the only political leaders to go through that sort of process. All of the political parties, National Party, New Zealand First, and ACT have been in tough situations themselves in the past, involving the loss of members, and have had to deal with it. So that is the nature of leadership in Parliament.
Yeah, it's been an incredibly tumultuous time for Te Pāti Māori, especially after the support that, the country really showed them in 2023, and also some really good poll results as well for Te Pāti Māori. Do you think that they will get back to the 5% or above the 5% threshold before the next election?
That's really the challenge facing the leadership right now, is really how to rebuild that confidence, that faith, that the constituents have shown Te Pāti Māori in the last election is really to focus on rebuilding that connection with what voters saw in Te Pāti Māori to have that result come through.
Is it disappointing that this kind of stuff and this saga and making the headlines does detract from the party's main purpose, and that's to bring forward Māori and voice Māori concerns in Parliament?
It certainly does divert attention and energy to sorting out disagreements, but it's really difficult to conduct business when you're really sort of deep in a disagreement. And I guess with the expulsion of the two Māori MPs from Te Pāti Māori is that I guess the leadership were hoping that matters would be resolved, but as we're seeing, no, they're not. They're sort of they're hotting up.
What's next in the timeline of this? When should we see an ultimate conclusion, do you think?
Next election is my guess.
Yep, so it'll take until then to just really see where the battle lines are drawn.
I think so. I mean, if the two newly independent MPs stay in Parliament as independent MPs, that'll be their time to work out, well, how best can they sort of continue to be representatives for their constituents. in Parliament going forward. And similarly for Te Pāti Māori is to work out, well, how can they reconnect with constituents from those affected regions and voters to sort of reconnect really and reaffirm their ability to represent those voters in those places at the same level. And so it'll be all on come the next election.
Thanks for joining us, Jason.
You're welcome. Kia ora.
That's it for this episode of The Front Page. You can read more about today's stories and extensive news coverage at nzherald.co.nz. The Front Page is produced by Jane Yee and Richard Martin, who is also our editor. I'm Chelsea Daniels. Subscribe to The Front Page on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts, and tune in on Monday for another look behind the headlines.